In this video, I'm going to show you the game between Hikaru Nakamura and Javokhir Sindarov, and what a game it was. Before we dive into that, let's take a look at the standings after 4 rounds. So out ahead, Javokhir Sindarov, 20 years old, from Uzbekistan, defeated Fabiano Caruana in an excellent game in round 4. And behind him, well, Fabiano Caruana, a point behind. And what about Sindarov's opponent, Hikaru Nakamura? Well, he was on 1.5 out of 4 going into this round. And Hikaru has not had a good tournament so far. Remember, he lost in the first round against Caruana. Not a great game. Drew 2 games. Pretty solid. And then he was gifted a golden opportunity by Wei Yi in round 4. But he failed to take it. And it was in a rook and pawn endgame where normally I would say Hikaru, he's a brilliant technician. Normally I would expect him to clinch that kind of game. But no, he missed it. However, this game against Sindarov was a really good opportunity for Nakamura to redeem himself. If he could win, he would bounce up to 50% and, of course, absolutely in contention. And that would peg back Sindarov. So there was all to play for in this game. And what a fantastic game it turned out to be. Nakamura started with d4 and Queen's Gambit. Not accepted, declined. And, knight f6, bishop e7, normal moves here, but c6 from Sindarov, the so-called triangle system. Now, Sindarov was playing this for a lot of last year, so this would not have come as a surprise to Nakamura. And it can lead to all kinds of complicated systems, like, because black hasn't played knight f6, you can possibly go into a Dutch. You can play the so-called notenboom, but grabbing this pawn on c4. It can transpose into a Catalan, a Slav. So it depends what white wants here. You could play steadily with e3, so most likely we're going to get a Slav. Or knight f3, there's potential for the notenboom. Anyway, Nakamura plays one of the sharpest moves, e4. So this involves a gambit, if white wants, the so-called Marshall gambit. Well, it looks very logical to advance in the center like this. And after black takes, then bishop b4 check. Now, if white wants to kind of put the brakes on, you can retreat the knight to c3, and that's playable, that's okay. But it's after c5, well, it's much quieter. But Nakamura accepts the challenge. Bishop d2. So this is the so-called Marshall gambit. Queen takes pawn. Bishop takes bishop. Queen takes knight. Check. So you can see that black has grabbed a pawn, but this bishop is so powerful, slicing across black's king. But black might grab a second pawn here. It's possible. But first, Sindarov played knight f6. I mean, both sides playing very quickly here. Of course, the bishop is attacked. It moved down to d6. Nakamura has previously played bishop c3 and bishop a5 in obviously different games. So, he's not unfamiliar with this opening and was still playing very quickly. Now, I think if white is allowed to play knight f3 and castle, then that's just fantastic compensation for white with that incredible bishop just in such a beautiful position. So queen takes g2. I think, this is basically the only way to play it. You grab as much material as possible. I mean, hundreds of games have been played in this line. Bishop f3. Both players still playing instantly. So white has given up 2 pawns, but has very good development And yeah, pieces look very active as well. Those bishops look amazing. And knight g3. And the normal move here, the move that's been played before, and which the computer quite likes for black, is e5. So freeing that bishop. But Sindarov played castles kingside very, very quickly. So clearly this was part of his preparation. You don't go into this kind of position blind. And here is where Nakamura sat and thought for 1 hour, 7 minutes, and 44 seconds before he made his next move. That is extraordinary. Now he played h4. We'll come back to this moment later. So he's pushing the queen, which moves across, beg your pardon, moves across to a5, check. Now, if the king moves, let's say here, then rook d8, and that pin is extremely annoying. So white has to kind of just carry on. b4. And that was taken. So now black has 3 pawns. 3 extra pawns. Okay, there are threats here, of course. Now, if bishop takes, then knight d5, discovered check, and then you pick up the bishop. If queen d2, then you can give a knight fork. So castles kingside. And rook e8. And Sindarov was sort of being careful here. He thought for 11 minutes over knight takes b4. And then 1 minute over rook e8. And, well, Nakamura, having invested that 67 minutes over one move, obviously unfamiliar with the position. And, was still spending time. He spent 4 minutes over castles, 2 minutes 50 over queen d2. Tax the knight. Now, obviously, white has compensation here. These bishops are tremendous. And black's kingside is not very well protected. So rook d1. And this is an issue, of course. Developing the queenside. But 3 pawns is a lot of material. So knight f5. Okay, this makes a lot of sense to exchange pieces. And white, I think, doesn't really have an alternative, considering that, all these points are threatened. So knight takes knight and pawn takes. That exchange, of course, means that the bishop has the possibility to come to e6, which looks like quite a nice square. Of course, doubling the pawns isn't great, but listen, you've got 3 pawns. It doesn't matter, really. So the bishop can come to e6 in some lines. And queen f6. But yeah, exchanging off that knight meant that black's kingside he's lost one of the defenders, the knight on e7. So very natural for Nakamura to bring over the queen. Good move from Sindarov, knight c6. So he's looking to bring that knight back into play here. King h1. This looks very, very scary. Knight d4 and rook g1. Scary for black. Now, here is where I think I'm going to pause the game, and time for me to have a lovely cup of Barry's tea. And you have a think. How do you play with black in this position? So it's a think and drink moment. Black to play. This is tricky. Cheers. Do you want to improve your chess? Get access to live masterclasses with yours truly? Then subscribe to patreon.com/PowerPlayChess, and for just $25 a month, you get a newsletter with a test game, calculation puzzles, a monthly opening survey, access to an archive with over 100 opening surveys, And you can join in live masterclasses exclusive to patrons where you can ask me questions directly over Zoom. All for only $25 per month. Do subscribe to patreon.com/PowerPlayChess and join the club. Do consider supporting the channel on patreon.com/PowerPlayChess and help keep the lights on, or perhaps pay for better lights. Anyway, let's get back to the position. Black to play, what would you do? Well, Sindarov played the best move. I mean, you know, at this stage, he's an hour ahead on the clock. So he had the time to calculate everything really precisely. He played g6, best move. It's tempting to exchange off that bishop first. It's a very dangerous piece. But did you spot this? I mean, this is just fantastic. Rook takes pawn. Rook g1 check. I mean, that's a funny move in itself, because if that's taken, then it's a draw by perpetual check, like that. Now, black can try and play for a win with king h8, but watch this. Queen f3, queen d8, the queen comes back to defend. Queen g3, threatening mate on g7. This didn't happen, just a reminder, it didn't happen, but it's a great variation. Watch this. And now bishop e7. What a beautiful move. Rook takes bishop, queen g8 mate. Queen takes bishop, queen g7 mate. And this will win black's queen. And white has some chances. Anyway, that didn't happen, but it's a beautiful variation. It just shows what happens if you're careless in such a sharp position. Now, Sindarov played g6, best move. Although, I have to say, it looks rather frightening because those dart squares are now so weak. And Nakamura decided, right, I want to keep that bishop. Bishop e6, good move. You've got to try and block out that bishop. Bishop takes b7. So Nakamura grabs one pawn back. Then knight e2. Now, it would be very nice to bring the queen down to h6, but Nakamura did not play it. Why not? I think he didn't like queen c3, which defends down here, but also threatens, you know, some nastiness on h3 as well, not to mention the rook is attacked. So instead, Nakamura compromised. Queen d2. But after the queen exchange, well, this is pretty simple for black. So you've grabbed that rook. Nakamura took the rook at the other end. So we've got rook and bishop against rook and bishop, opposite coloured bishop endgame. But that move is very, very strong. So the pin is annoying for white. And bishop takes pawn is threatened. There's not a lot that white can do about that. So bishop f4, exchange of rooks. And black is back to being 3 pawns up. Now, with a double pawn, sometimes that's an issue. You know, in effect, black is only playing with one extra pawn on the king side, but actually this is pretty simple. Takes. That a pawn is a long way from the king, and there really isn't a lot that white can do in this position. And here we go, h6. So basically, before black's king moves over to the queen side, it's necessary to create a pass pawn on the king side. We have to keep the king busy. So that bishop is just stationed beautifully. So now the road is clear for black's king. And after this move, Nakamura resigned. Okay, let's just check why he resigned. because if king takes pawn, then king e6. So the king is going to reach b3, and then it'll just support the a pawn down to the queening square. And in the meantime, white's king can take a couple of pawns, but because the bishop and pawn are anchored like that, that's it. Black just ends up a piece up. Wow. So Sindarov extends his lead. It's quite extraordinary. I mean, after the game, Sindarov said, I know the line really well. I wrote down a few things from his post-game interview. Black has a very hard position, but after Nakamura played h4, let's go back to that position actually, because that's very important. So the position after h4, just bear with me. Yeah. He said after he plays h4, I'm just better and I have 1 hour more time. He said, Sindarov was a little bit surprised, he said, by d4. But however, he said that this move castles in this position, this was his preparation from the World Cup. So that was in October. He also spent all of the free day going through all these variations. So, that shows that Sindarov was very much in the swing of things. Played the triangle system throughout last year, prepared it for the World Cup. He's had tournaments since then. Of course, he played in the Tata Steel Masters. He would have kept going over his preparation. And in the run-up to the candidates, of course, he has prepared well and had the whole of yesterday, the free day, to prepare as well. So he really was in the swing of things. And his technique was excellent. I mean, he said afterwards, so he was asked, how is it that you keep getting in your preparation in most of your games in the candidates? And Sindarov said, maybe I'm just lucky. I would say it's the old thing, the harder he works, the luckier he gets. Now, contrast this with Nakamura. He had a brief interview with Charlize Theron, with Charlize, not Charlize Theron, but Charlize from FIDE. And Nakamura said, I know, forgive me, hang on. Let me get the exact quote. This is important. Nakamura said, it's pretty straightforward. Either I completely forgot what was in my file, or it's on my team and I looked at something where castles is not a move. I suspect it's the latter, and I didn't forget, so it's very unfortunate. I considered knight e4 during the game, but without any prep, it's impossible to play that position, so that's life. Okay, so Nakamura seems to be blaming his team for messing up the opening preparation, which contributed to the loss. Well, what do you think of that? Does he have a point? Or perhaps he should be taking responsibility for everything that's played at the chessboard? I think, for me, it just shows that Nakamura is really rusty, not just on the chessboard, but actually even with his preparation. That, of course, if you go into a line as sharp as this, it's unbelievably sharp. You have to know it backwards, forwards. You have to have checked this yourself, check it with your team. You have to look at all the possibilities. It's a huge amount of work, but it seems to me he didn't put it in, So h4 was played here. Knight e4 is the critical move. And, well, as Sindarov said afterwards, that after h4, in fact, the knight is poorly placed on g3. So, for him, it seemed like a very natural move, knight e4. And, well, the computer says this is still roughly level. Maybe white has a slight advantage, but still roughly level. But, of course, it's just fantastically complicated. So there we go. Well, I think we should look at the standings after this fifth round. So we have out in front, Javokhir Sindarov on 4.5 out of 5. In second place, Fabiano Caruana with 3.5. Now, he defeated Matthias Blubaum in a very, very good game, actually. And then further back, we have Pragnananda and Anish Giri on 50%. They both have 2.5. And yeah, at the back of the pack, Yesipenko, 1.5, and Nakamura, 1.5. Woof. It's a long way back for Nakamura, but there is still time. There is still time, but it seems to me that that game really exposed his lack of really thorough preparation in all ways going into this tournament. Anyway, let's see what happens. Thanks for watching.